Welcome to the United Nations Global Compact First Ever Virtual Summit 2020. My name is Amanda Ellis. We are tuning in from Hawaii, so a big aloha. I lead global partnerships at the exciting new Julianne Wrigley Global Futures Laboratory at Arizona State University. And Julie is an incredible visionary with a huge love for Hawaii. So I know that this panel is very close to her heart, as it is to mine, having come here to Hawaii as a student on scholarship to the East-West Center many, many years ago, and met my husband here. So for me, this Mālama Honua, Regenerative Global Futures for a Thriving Planet, is such an exciting panel. The new Global Futures Laboratory really believes that Hawaii is a sustainability model for the rest of the planet. And it has been so exciting for me meeting all of the visionaries who are with us today and who are going to be sharing their wisdom. I'm going to give you a quick rundown of each of the speakers, and then we will go into more detail in their incredible bios as we move through to talk about the subject today. We all know that climate change, in fact, the climate crisis, is of increasing importance. We were on a panel with her deepness, Sylvia Earle, earlier today. And as she pointed out, what we do impacts everybody. And what we don't do impacts everybody. This is the UN Decade of Action, and it is so important for us all to be engaged. And luckily, we have such leadership here in Hawaii. Hawaii was the first state to immediately recommit to the Paris Accords on climate change when the president withdrew. Hawaii was the first state to commit to 100% renewable energy by 2045. And I'm delighted to say that now 23 other states have followed suit to Hawaii's lead in remaining in the Paris Accords on climate change. And 100 million Americans are now covered either at the state or local level for commitments on renewable energy. So thank you, Hawaii, for such wonderful leadership. Hawaii also has a very exciting milestone, which has just been celebrated in the United Nations 75th anniversary. And that is the first local voluntary review at the state level, which Hawaii Green Growth, led by CEO Celeste Connors, the governor, David Ige, and Senator Brian Schatz presented. And we're going to have a conversation after we have our panel conversation with Celeste to hear more about that exciting development. So you can see, for everybody tuning in and for those from around the world who are going to hear this recorded panel, what amazing leadership we have here in Hawaii. So our speakers today include Dr. Kamano Opono-Crab, who is currently the CEO of Kohala Institute, an amazing leader in Indigenous Wisdom and who has just such an incredible track record I would tell you about when we speak further. Second, Kalani Ka'anaana, who is the Director of Hawaiian Cultural Affairs and Natural Resources at the Hawaii Tourism Authority, and who will be presenting the SDG-informed Regenerative Tourism Plan. Next, Bettina Manhart, who is the first woman CEO of the year for Hawaii and is also the CEO of Architects Hawaii Limited. Next, Dwayne Kurusu, who is the founder and chairman of IEO Group and has also been the brain and a lot of the brawn behind Kahauiki Village, an exciting development we'll tell you more about. Next, we have an ecopreneur, Lauren Roth-Vanu, who I also like to call my water warrior, who is the founder of 3R Water and doing some incredible work in regenerative water solutions here. And finally, last but not least, Leila Kilolu, who is the policy analyst for the Honolulu Climate Change Commission and doing her PhD on an East-West Center fellowship in disaster and resilience here at the University of Hawaii. So you can see we have an absolutely stellar lineup. And as we are waiting for Dwayne to come on, this is a very difficult panel, a very difficult platform for everybody, the Hop-In platform. And we're so lucky to have Jess and Chloe behind the scenes who've been helping us all day. And we will do our absolute best to minimize the tech challenges. So without further ado, I am absolutely thrilled to just deconstruct a little for our international watchers and viewers, Mālama Honua, which means to take care of the earth. And this was also the title of a worldwide voyage which took place a couple of years ago, led by Nainoa Thompson and the Polynesian Voyaging Society. So Hawaii has proved the incredible scientific wisdom that Native Hawaiians had back in the 13th century when they sailed to my homeland, Aotearoa, New Zealand, and also to Tahiti and across the Pacific, using the star compass and Indigenous wisdom. So it is just wonderful to be here today and to introduce Dr. Kamana'o Crabb, who is now leading the team at the Kohala Institute, which is one of the last intact ahapuahas here in Hawaii. And again, for our international viewers, ahapuaha means an intact ecosystem from the ridge to the reef. And in the ancient days, pre-colonization, Native Hawaiians numbered around 1 million, according to estimates from Kamehameha schools here. And they lived in a very regenerative way in harmony with nature on about 6% of the land and as stewards of natural resources in the ocean. So the work that Kamana'o is doing is so exciting. And he is really a very, very respected spokesperson and representative for the Native Hawaiian community. I saw him open the entire global IUCN conference, the huge conference that takes place every 4 years for the Union, the Conservation of Nature here. He also serves on a number of advisory boards, including the Hawaii Executive Conference Advisory Board. He's a global expert in community health and resilience. And goodness, I could go on, Kamana'o, but I know that you are very
Amanda.
to get to us and to tell us a little bit about your vision for really what you can do with Kohala Institute and helping expand this vision of regenerative agriculture. Now, I know that you're going to be showing some slides, and Chloe is going to get those up for our viewers. Please double click on the slide deck so that it comes up as just a little bigger for you. Kamana'o, the floor is yours. We're so honored and delighted to have you with us.
Mahalo ya oe e Amanda no ko mea o launa no ke ia panela kapa I o Mālama Honua. Thank you, Amanda, for facilitating this panel of Mālama Honua. E mamake wau e aloha ako no ko o mahoan e noho no ke ia panela ni. To all my distinguished colleagues who also are part of this panel in the Great Valley of Moanalua on the island of Oahu. Aloha mai, aloha no, aloha kako. As Amanda was sharing and the issues about not just global impacts of sustainability, but in the theme of Mālama Honua, I thought it'd be interesting to share about the work that we're doing at Kohala Institute at Iole. We're located on the northern region of Hawaii Island. Our vision is to be a world leader that inspires sustainable thinking through a model 21st century ahupua'a, where land is chief and man is steward. We do that by preserving and perpetuating the natural landscape of the cultural assets. We also provide collaborative initiatives and leadership through a deep connection with our aina, with the ahupua'a of Iole, a pu'uhonua sanctuary, and educational place-based opportunities. And then lastly, we really strive to be a pioneer in sustainable practices to serve our Hawaii community and the world. A lot of times people ask, and if Chloe, you can go to the next slide, what is an ahupua'a? And as Amanda shared, it's an ancient template that dates back to the 14th century. And the architect of that, who first proposed and structured the ahupua'a system, was the 8th king of Oahu Island, and his name was Maili Kukahi. And it basically was based on boundaries of geographic and cultural areas from mountain to ocean. And as you can see, for many of you throughout the world, that is what our island home is like in Hawaii, mountain to ocean. So managing those resources takes quite a bit. And the ahupua'a system is not just about the template of mountain to ocean, but it's managing those resources. And it also was in concert with the chiefly structure of Hawaii, and usually done by a konehiki, or today they're called natural resource managers. What I wanted to present, and you can move to the next slide, Chloe, is that it's not always easy navigating ancient and into modern, and especially merging cultural knowledge with sciences. And so what we are striving for at Kohala Institute is a nice medium where we are able to access both the assets of traditional wisdom and knowledge, as well as sciences. And so how we do that is through indigenous wisdom. So for example, I already shared about going back to the architect Maili Kukahi in the 14th century. What we also know is that we are guided by the Kumulipo, which is a creation chant over 2,000 lines. And it has over 14 or so time periods. And within that chant, it talks about the creation of our universe, our world, the earth, but it also talks about the development of life forms from coral polyps to plants to animals, and then eventually to human development. And the reason why I share that is that becomes the foundation for one of our methodologies, which is called Papaku Makavalu. And it is about the 3 realms of knowledge, which is Papahuli which is about the universe of the heavens. And I think Lauren was talking about an app about the lunar cycle of the moon. And so that's part of the Papahuli system and knowledge and wisdom. The second is Papahuli Honua, everything that has to do with earth, including land management. But it also includes about the watershed, the misty rains, the type of rains, the rain clouds, and the interaction of the sun and the seasons. As Kalani had mentioned, we recently are in the phase of Piko Owa Kea, which is the time period of our solstice and equinox systems. And so we use those time periods to help govern what we plant, the observation of the changing of ocean tides. And as I shared that, there was just on the news last night about new policies entertained by the county, because they were claiming by research in 30 years, a substantial number of our beaches will be gone. And so that's a reality for Hawaii and also in the Pacific. So we are at ground zero, and we are beyond the effects of cultural impact. And so it's imperative that both indigenous wisdom and science and government come together to tackle these global climate change. That's a little bit of what we do. I'm excited to hear our other panelists, but thank you, Amanda, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Amanda, you're muted.
Got to be careful for the double click. Thank you so much, Kamana'o, and mahalo. It's really important to be grounded in the incredible wisdom of this beautiful place. And I know that Pono Shim often says that Auntie Pelahi said to him that people would be searching for Hawaii in the 21st century because Hawaii has the key, and the key is aloha. So I think that that's just, it's wonderful to have you introduce in this way. And it's a beautiful segue into Kalani's work. And Kalani is descended from many generations in Kailua and brings also a deep knowledge of Indigenous wisdom and respect for sustainability to his important role in the Tourism Authority. And we have a new director of the Tourism Authority, John DeFries, also Native Hawaiian. And it's very exciting for us as board members of Hawaii Green Growth to see that the Tourism Authority has grounded its plan in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So Kalani, please tell us all about that. We know that tourism is Hawaii's #1 industry, and tell us a little bit about the realities of how COVID has hit. We know that unemployment is very significant in Hawaii, and how you are envisaging a sustainable future leveraging tourism.
Amanda. Honui ka ko e nā hoa maka maka, mai kahi ki aku o ka honua nei. Greetings to all of you, our friends who are joining us from around the globe today as we talk about Mālama Honua. I'm super honored and humbled to be on this panel as well. I'm so grateful for the invitation and to see the smiling faces of friends here on the panel. I wish I could see all of you 44 that are watching, but please know that I give you my aloha before I begin. I think ultimately this conversation around Mālama Honua and this idea of protecting and caring for our island Earth really is the centerpiece and the focus of our work. So in Hawaii, like Amanda had mentioned, tourism is the significant economic driver. It represents about $2 billion in tax revenue to the state, supports 217,000 jobs. So it's a key driver. COVID obviously has essentially frozen the industry. Tourism is down 98% year over year for us, and so it's a huge challenge for us. Beyond that, I'd also add that even prior to COVID, Hawaii was at a crossroads. Hawaii had a choice. We welcomed 10.4 million visitors to the state last year in 2019, and it put a big tax on our infrastructure. And if not properly managed, like what Kamana'o was sharing with the Ahupua, a system in mind, if we don't have that active management of the destination, it can cause trouble. So I think for us, fundamentally, what's been really exciting in the last couple of years that I've been on board at HTA, the Hawaii Tourism Authority, which is a state entity, we're actually a state office, is our shift and our transition in thinking from being a traditional destination marketing organization, right, like a visitors and convention bureau, to something that's more holistic as a destination management organization. And really that shift in thinking has opened our eyes to the work and possibility ahead of us. And so what it's allowed us to do is align our work at the Tourism Authority with the Aloha Plus Challenge and our local 2030 hub, and the work that they're doing with the Sustainable Business Forum and so many other venues. And it allowed us to take what they came up with, a Mālama mandate, and actually put it in our strategic plan. And so in January of this year, our HTA board adopted a new 5-year strategic plan whose core is informed by this notion of Mālama Honua or Mālama Aina. We've been using the term Mālama Ku'uhome, which literally means to care for our home, and making sure that it's SDG informed. And so we actually reference the SDGs in the strategic pillars. There are 4, the first being natural resources, and that was intentional. We wanted to put some intentionality by saying if we don't have our aina and our kai, our land and our oceans, we really have nothing. we won't be a hospitable place to live or to welcome guests. And so we prioritize that. The next thing we did is we leaned on our indigenous knowledge, and we put Hawaiian culture as the second pillar, so that it informs all that we do across the board. And then next, we recognize that communities, right, actual people, are really integral to what a destination is. And then finally, how do we tell that story of people, place, and purpose? And so in our branding or in our marketing, it's really about how do we align those three things: purpose, people, and place. And so it's been a really fantastic journey for us as we learn more as the industry about how to be more regenerative in our work, and sort of taking it beyond responsible tourism and sustainable tourism. And it really isn't just a conversation about a buzzword or a key term. We truly want to understand, how do we create an industry that is regenerative to this place, that can go on for a long time until we can be the catalyst for the other changes we want to see as we move toward a more circular economy? How do we keep local dollars in our economy longer? How do we provide support to emerging industries, whether it be agriculture or others, that are critical to us becoming self-reliant? That all that is kind of working together. And so I think our strat plan and our work with SDGs and the Aloha Plus Challenge and the Local 2030 Hub are really, really poignant in this decade of action ahead. But thanks again for the opportunity to share a little bit about what we're doing. Thanks, Amanda.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kalani. And as New Zealand's ambassador to the United Nations during the time that we were negotiating the Sustainable Development Goals, I can't tell you how exciting it is to see this lived reality with Hawaii as such a leader in the United States. And of course, having been named the first local 2030 island hub on the planet. So we know that all the other islands are looking to Hawaii for leadership. This morning, Henk Rogers also launched a new islands initiative around the 100% renewable energy goal. So it's just so exciting to see how much is going on here in Hawaii. And of course, Mālama ku'u home. For our viewers, ku'u is a special word which means beloved in Hawaiian. And so I think that's such a beautiful way of describing that too. Thank you, Kalani. I'm now going to transition to Bettina, who, like me, came here as a student, and I came back. Bettina never left. And so it's wonderful to welcome you, Bettina. And you are the President and Chief Executive Officer of Architects Hawaii Limited, which is almost 75 years old now as a firm, but still looking towards the future. And I know in 2016, you were named a fellow in the American Institute of Architecture, which is a very prestigious honor. So congratulations for that. You're also a real advocate for strong resilience policies. And I know that your firm has a philosophy of being a very regenerative building company. Now, you're also on the board of the Climate Commission, which I'm going to ask you about later. But please tell us about Architects Hawaii and how that is helping to bring about the goals that Hawaii has in terms of energy efficiency and a regenerative future.
Oh, Amanda, thank you so much for such a nice introduction and for asking me to join this group of people representing our state. I can't even speak Hawaiian, and I have to follow Kamana'o and Kalani with my German accent, but I am thrilled to be here, so thank you. Our architecture firm is one of the oldest and the largest in the state of Hawaii. You just mentioned we are almost 75 years old. We are diverse in the markets we serve, and we are proud of our approach to have every single building make a difference. And given that the building industry generates about 40% of the annual global greenhouse gas emissions, and that the global building stock is expected to double in the next 40 years, we not only have a tremendous opportunity to impact climate change, but we also have a responsibility. So as designers, we pledged our support to the AIA's, the American Institute of Architects, Commitment 2030. And that means that we are aiming at carbon neutrality of the building sector by 2030. Now, this includes developing approaches to reducing embodied as well as operational carbon. Let me say a couple words about that. Embodied carbon comes from the manufacturing, the transportation, and the installation of construction materials, which is very hard to reduce for an island as remote as Hawaii, because everything needs to be shipped here. So one of the things we are working on is finding new ways of incorporating used materials in some of our designs, obviously where it's appropriate. And we're looking at materials that we have here, but that traditionally have not been used in the building sector, such as using invasive woods in buildings. And then operational carbon, which is a building's energy consumption, which goes to heating, cooling, and lighting. So Hawaii allows us to design for many renewable energy options. So note here, with the increase of operational efficiencies, the impact of embodied carbon emissions in our buildings will become progressively more important, obviously. So another innovation in the building industry in this context is carbon sequestering concrete. That utilizes carbon, which replaces some of the cement required for the concrete while still maintaining its strength. So for Hawaii, this is particularly interesting since that decreases the amount of cement needing to be shipped to the island, and it embeds a locally produced pollutant, all while reducing the carbon footprint. And the second leg to leadership for us ties into business. So as business leaders, we are focusing on making the concept of private-public partnerships work. As such, we are members of a number of private-public think tanks. Several of you have mentioned Hawaii Green Growth. That's a group of leaders working together across government, business, academia, and community to achieve certain targets in the energy, the food, and the environmental security areas, all for a sustainable and resilient future. The second is the Sustainable Business Forum. That's a group of Hawaii executives who are committed to the triple bottom line outcomes, to building community resilience, and lastly, advancing the Aloha Plus Challenge, which we will hear a little bit more about later. And then lastly, the city's Climate Change Commission. And that is a group of climate experts that is charged with gathering the latest science information on how climate change is impacting our state. And it provides then, this group, advice and recommendation to the mayor and his administration as they look to draft policy and engage in planning for future climate scenarios. And with that, reducing Honolulu's contribution to global greenhouse gas emissions. How is that, Amanda? I can keep on going, but I am awfully mindful of the time here. So
wonderful, and we will come back to a second round. And I think the point about concrete is such an interesting one. So we were on a call today with one of our We Empower UN SDG Challenge winners, one of our women entrepreneurs from Israel. And she does a lot of work with marine concrete. And she was saying that, in fact, concrete is now the second most abundant element after water. So it's responsible for some 8 to 9% of global emissions. So Bettina, the points you made, and we see Pam from Elemental Accelerator pointing out Carbon Cure, which is the CO2 mineralized concrete, and which, by the way, we are working with at Arizona State University as well now, having been put onto them by elemental. It's such an important issue to be thinking about, Kamana'o's point, about how we can take this philosophy of indigenous wisdom and regenerative approaches, but couple it with new technologies. And when we think too about renewable energy and the fact that Hawaii now has the highest percentage of solar rooftop in the nation, that is really just Maui harnessing the sun. We have the same myth in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So it is so exciting to see this new interpretation, the technology that is in fact a manifestation of these beautiful values that are associated with regenerative philosophies that underpin Indigenous wisdom. So thank you so much, Bettina, for the work that you're doing and the leadership that you're exemplifying. We'll come back and talk a little more about the Sustainable Business Forum. We were all together in person in New York last year as part of the UN Global Compact. So this year we're online with the virtual summit. We're pivoting, we're being innovative. And I would now love to pivot to welcome Dwayne Kurisu, who is a very well-known business person in Hawaii. And I first met Dwayne in his shorts and his flip-flops. I had no idea who he was. And we were down together working with volunteers on his site, Kahauiki Village. And for me, I wanted to start with that, Dwayne. I know that you have an incredible business legacy. You're a real estate investor, the chair and CEO of IEO Group, holding company for brands which focuses on Hawaii and the Pacific in media, in sport and food, but you're so involved in the community as well. And I think that's what you're best known and loved for in the work that you do for the board of the Hawaii Executive Collaborative, the Executive Committee of the Hawaii Asia Pacific Association, and just, you know, you're such a stalwart of the community here. But I remember when we met and you were explaining the philosophy at Kahauiki Village, which is really addressing the social problem that Hawaii, like the rest of the world, is facing with this growing problem of homelessness. Now, as an economist, I can tell you that you can do anything with numbers. And we economists have been very sly over the last few years and taken housing costs out of inflation numbers. So we all pretend that inflation is in fact very low, when most people spend at least a third of their income on housing as a cost. And homelessness is a growing problem, not only here in Hawaii, but on the mainland US and around the world. And so, Dwayne, I would love it if you could tell us a little bit about your innovative approach to bringing community back into your philosophy at Kahauiki Village, how you got everybody involved, you repurposed Japanese shipping containers, you managed to fast track permits. It's really just an amazing story. So I'd love it if you could share that vision for us of building sustainable community.
Well, first of all, Amanda, I remember those days fondly when we all volunteered to help build those homes. And you've done such a great job of explaining everything. Maybe I should just stop here and let you continue. But, you know, we're all shaped by the way we grew up. And for me, I grew up in a little plantation town called Hakalau. And in contrast to other plantation towns around the world, even if we had these different stratas of there's a certain hierarchy of people. It was a time when that we all remember fondly, and we weren't judged by the amount of money that we made, but instead it was things like character, trust, friendship, and generosity. And so when we came to the issue of homelessness, I looked at it coming from that standpoint about building community and shelter coming after that. So Kahauiki really is it's really not shelter. It's really a community. We have every home has its own bathroom and kitchen. We have a store. We have a country store. We have a post office. We have a laundry facility. We have a recreation center, and we have child care center and preschool. on site. So it's really a self-contained community where everybody pays rent. Oh, by the way, these are homes designed for families with children. So you need to have children to be part of this community. So right now we've built 144 homes, and we have over 700 adults and children that live in this village. So even if the village is complete, our job is not finished, because our job continues as we help to build dignity and this sense of self-worth among the people that live in that village. So as I mentioned, everybody pays rent. And if you come to the village without a job, we've lined up jobs within walking distance from the village. So everybody needs to have a sense of worth and a sense of having to make a living. So in the rent, to make it affordable, in the rent is included electricity and water, high-speed internet and cable TV, and most of the cost of childcare. And to make it affordable for us, we decided to bring everything. Oh, before I get to that, you can see the picture that these homes are really recycled homes from emergency homes from Tohoku, Japan. So these were refurbished, brought to Hawaii, and we redesigned them to have more of like this plantation look that you see. So this picture here is a picture of preschool and childcare center, and they're all using the same materials that we brought in from Japan, but all repurposed with different roof. So in order to maintain our cost of power, what we did was we decided to be completely off the grid. So we were the first. Tesla said that we were the first community in the world to be completely off the grid. So if you can show the next slide. So in the center of this, you can see there's a battery bank, and on the upper side of the photo is a solar farm. On the upper left side of the photo is our first increment where we decided to put the solar panels on the roofs, which is why they have a slope on the roof. And towards the front of the picture, you'll see that the roofs are flat, which enabled us, because we were able to build a solar farm next to it. Next photo, please. So we've had people from all over the world come and visit Kahawiki Village. And whenever they come, they almost always say there's something really different about this place. I see people smiling. I see children laughing and playing. And my answer to them is, I said, what you sense is the soul of Kahawiki Village. So Kahawiki Village has a soul that's built from all the people like Amanda, who's come and put their heart and their hands into building this Kahawiki Village. You know, my job was to go and find the money to build this village for 144 homes. And when I went out to solicit roofers, pavers, people, doorknobs, windows, not one person or organization said no. Hawaii is one of the most generous places in the world. And when I say this village has soul, it really has Hawaii's soul. It has imprint of every single person that put their heart and soul into this village. So I think it's something that's unique in Hawaii. It's a public-private partnership where the state owns the land, where we've rented the land for $1 a year, and our nonprofit raised the money to build what you see in this photo here. Amanda, back to you.
Fantastic. Mahalo, Dwayne. And this is such a beautiful example of an embodiment of the Sustainable Development Goals. Goal number 1, no poverty, and goal 17, partnership and collective action. With goal number 7, energy, renewable, clean and affordable energy thrown in. And for me, because women's empowerment is one of my obsessions and passions, having been lead specialist for gender at the World Bank in another life, and just seeing what you did with childcare was the other thing that really inspired me. So it's also SDG 5. And I think for me, just looking at this focus on both innovation and the SDGs is part of the reason that I'm just so thrilled and so proud to work with Julie Wrigley, the new Global Futures Laboratory at ASU, which was formally launched, the Julianne Wrigley Global Futures Laboratory, last week, is really grounded in ASU's leadership on the Sustainable Development Goals. It is number 1 in terms of impact for the Sustainable Development Goals in the US. And it's number 1 for innovation ahead of Stanford and MIT for the last 6 years in a row. So for me, I really see this innovation and the SDGs as something that Hawaii has in common with the work that ASU is trying to do. And of course, Hawaii has such an important part in Julie's heart as well. So thank you so much, Dwayne, for your leadership and for bringing the community together in a way that creates the kind of example that is a wonderful blueprint, not only for Hawaii, but also for other islands and for other countries around the world. So thank you so much for that work. And I'm thrilled now to come to Lauren Roth-Vanu, who has already been on another panel with us today with one of our We Empower winners from Africa, from Water Access Rwanda. And so, Lauren, thank you very much for joining us again and telling us about your story. I hadn't heard before today that it was actually your concern about seeing the water where you grew up have higher chlorine content than a swimming pool that started you on your vision, and that was really your origin story in starting with your 3R water. So I'm thrilled to be working with you through Blue Startups, and so delighted to see that Blue Startups is really focused on women founders now. So you have such an interesting background with Roth Ecological Design and then 3R Water Inc., which is so innovative around groundwater. But I'm going to let you explain. So tell us all about what you're trying to achieve and how you are working with the public sector as well as the private sector.
Thank you, Amanda. Mahalo nui to everyone here. I'm just very honored. This is an amazing panel. And I'm glad I get to at least kind of and tie in the water piece to this discussion. I mean, of course, water is central not only to us in Hawaii and being the thread that I think unites community and people and our basic livelihood, but I think that's it's also a macro scale on the global scale, our impacts on the water cycle and seeing the impacts today and climate change. Yeah, so just for everyone, my background, I have been in the water sector for over 20 years. As Amanda alluded to, I guess from my previous talk, I kind of looked back and I didn't realize it, but I had actually started my entrepreneurial focus in water when I was 16. I had a little experiment, take a pH of my tap. This was back in North Carolina where I grew up, and it was high. The chlorine levels was higher in a swimming pool, so I started selling water filters. I guess that was my first gig on the water sector. But what happened later was after I graduated, I had a degree in water resource management from University of Colorado. And I met up with a guy named John Todd, who was an inventor of a technology called the Living Machine, which was a nature-based solution. And I had always had been attuned to the natural world of having the billions of years of experience of really having that technology to hone in and for us to readapt into our built environments. So really today that really equates to things called green infrastructure. And I think before I go forward, I think maybe we look back, since we have a very distinguished Hawaiian panel, we're focused in Hawaii. It's important to acknowledge that the Hawaiians of the past actually really were the first ecological engineers. They really were the first to kind of adapt and understand the importance of green infrastructure, because in that Ahupua'a model was a lot of water management utilizing various types of ecological systems. Like the lo'i, for example, was not only a way to take water from a stream, slow it down, settle out the particulates as a way of stormwater management, but also then those nutrients then fed the taro patches and also created food, right? So in many ways, my journey has been to look at nature-based solutions from the past, but importantly, bringing them into the future and recognizing that we need to rebuild these things into the urban environment. I had spoken about this earlier in the previous panel, but in most cities across the United States and globe, we've removed about 70% of the natural services, those ecosystems, the wetlands and prairies, those systems that act as a sponge and filter of a lot of our water resources. And so as we paved over everything, we have now, we talked about the concrete for carbon sequestration, but we've also created a lot of hard surfaces where we used to have natural systems to absorb and filter out these water resources. So what that does is it rains, water now runs off and carries pollution, can cause flooding, ends up in our pipe network and is discharged into our oceans, which can impact our ocean resources. But then it also can impact future supply, because now we can't get that water into the ground to basically, replenish our underlying groundwater resources. So a lot of what I did when I created Roth Ecological, 14 years ago, we really created a niche in the design world where we focused on nature-based solutions for water management, from everything from wastewater to stormwater, even thinking about integrated water resource management. So we think about, tying in that water is basically, it's now being called one water, that there's no such thing as, water is basically cycle in the natural world, and how we can try to biomimic that into our built spaces and really maximize, management of water on property and not create a problem. So there's a saying that pollution is out of place. So if we can be smart about it and think about how we incorporate these types of technologies and recycle it, then we can talk about water then again being a resource rather than a liability. And so with 3R Water, which is how we kind of got re-engaged, a couple years ago, actually it was through my design firm, we were tasked to go audit really large commercial properties to identify opportunities that would meet some of the Hawaii freshwater initiatives, which relates to meeting water conservation goals, water reuse, and stormwater recharge. We had a great client who wanted to really take part and be part of meeting these goals. And so we were tasked to go, look at all these buildings, and I was trying to identify opportunities for stormwater capture in this case. And it dawned on me that it would be fantastic to have this mobile application to be able to go around and essentially identify these opportunities, quantify volumes, and then size green infrastructure in a really simple way. And so I pitched that idea to the State of Hawaii Water Security Advisory Group, as well as the Hawaii Community Foundation a couple of years back, and we got funding to develop the mobile application. It's called Follow the Drop, and we ended up piloting it in schools to start, and we wanted to make sure that it would be as easy to use and kids would give feedback on user experience, and also start educating the youth, because they are also really the ones that are going to go home and tell their parents how to adapt and then so what had happened was through about a year ago, the city and county of Honolulu approached us as well, because I don't know if most folks on this panel or in this audience know, but the city and county of Honolulu is developing a stormwater utility. And this is not unique to Hawaii. This is something that is happening in 2,000 plus locations across the US and growing in 9 countries, really because they really need to start getting financing to adapt to climate changes, get infrastructure up to speed. And so with the utility, we are basically going to pilot the app. It's going to basically they'll allow this used by the property owners to identify where and how much stormwater they're generating. It'll size them.
So this is such a fantastic, I know you could talk about this for hours, and I'm just cognizant of time. So please put in the chat where people can read more about this. It's such a great example of an ecopreneur who is coming up with a solution that can really be used by the city and state infrastructure. So it's such a cool story. And it's a wonderful segue into Leila Kilolu, who is working for the city, the Honolulu Climate Change Commission, and is also involved in disaster and resilience work. So Leila, tell us just a little bit about the work that the commission is doing. I know, Bettina, you've just had a paper come up, which Leila's very excited about. So just in a couple of minutes, tell us about how your work intersects.
Yes, absolutely, thank you. So I'm Leila, and I'm a PhD student at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, studying urban planning, which is a very special program here because it's place-based and based on Indigenous knowledge, which is a different perspective in urban planning and land use management. As part of my PhD work, I support the Climate Change Commission in research and writing their papers. And some of the papers that the commission has released include one about climate change impacts to Hawaii specifically. As Kamana'o mentioned, Hawaii is ground zero for climate change. So this is a very important document that is available on the resilientoahu.org website. There's also a shoreline setback guidance document that talks about recommendations to build, a little further back. We also released one about climate change and financial risk, which is about the financial and insurance, like the risks that the city could be facing because of climate change. We're also working, Bettina on this construction industry and climate change. It's being drafted currently, but it talks about opportunities for the construction industry. And also a social cost of carbon paper. And so these are just things that, on the policy level, tries to help the city leadership plan for climate change while also engaging the private sector. And so I think that the Climate Change Commission, which was established just a couple years ago now, has done so much work in this area. And there's so much synergy between the private and public sector through this commission. Mahalo.
Mahalo, Leila. I cannot believe we are almost at the top of the hour, and you all have such incredible, important information to impart. So I would love to do a final round, and then we're going to bring Celeste Connors in. So I'm hoping you can stay on and answer the questions that are going to come in the chat as well. But Celeste Connors, who's CEO of Hawaii Green Growth, will be joining us at 5:30 to talk about Hawaii's voluntary local review. But I would love to ask you all to tell us the one thing that you would like those who are listening to take away from the regenerative work that you're doing. And so just one thing, and if there's a barrier that you have overcome or that you have advice about, I would also love you to tell us about that. So Kalani, I was going to ask you about the Palau Pledge, which I think is such a cool model, but I think we may have to wait for that for another time. But just would love to know, what's the one thing that you would like us all to take away and to help you with in your role leading tourism in Hawaii and a barrier? And I'm going to be asking each of you that same question.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda, for the question. I don't know if I necessarily think of them as barriers. Can you hear me now? Okay, awesome. I don't necessarily think of them as barriers. I tend to think about sort of what is the secret recipe, if you will, for the success that we've seen. And for me, anytime you can find a strange bedfellow and reach some compromise, you're going to get extraordinary results. And so as you build multidisciplinary and public-private partnerships, it's that special sauce, I think, that helps you achieve whatever it is you want to. I try not to focus on the barrier per se, but find people that are different than you and work with them. And that's why, like, Bettina and I had a conversation at the Surf Jack, right, on the patio there with all kinds of amazing people from really different parts of our community. And when we got together, it inspired us and allowed us to collaborate. So that's what I would say. Thanks.
Brilliant, that diversity dividend, fantastic. So Kamana'o, may I invite you next?
Thank you, Amanda. What I probably would share is that, you know, there's innovation both in ancient indigenous knowledge and wisdom, as well as, you know, the modern sciences as today. And I think what we're doing is we're finding ways to expand and to reach out. So for example, at Kohala Institute, we're developing a leadership academy around not only a curriculum of ahupua'a management, but it takes into account all of these traditional disciplines that typically were for kahuna or priests or specialists. And we're deconstructing it by the different realms. But also, I've been challenged now is to help put that curriculum into a virtual ahupua'a or distance learning medium, which I don't have much experience, but certainly challenged by that, and especially with the younger generation, we're moving towards a really rapid pace of how do we present indigenous knowledge through apps on your phone, and then how do we measure outcomes such as the SDGs and through Hawaii Green Growth and Aloha Plus Challenge. And so we're moving in that direction already and really making sure the integration of both as we move forward. Thanks, Amanda.
Brilliant, thank you. I love it. This idea of the fusion of innovation, both ancient indigenous wisdom and modern science. And it sounds like there's a collaboration there for us around this this new project. So, Bettina.
Kalani hit it in the head in regards to my approach. We need to be reminded and can't forget that we will not accomplish anything by ourselves. And we are so much more powerful if we listen to each other, have an open mind, and then work together. He called it the secret sauce. I kind of like that, so I want to borrow that term. We have so much. We have so much talent, and the problem of climate change is overwhelming. So in many ways, solving something as complex as climate change is the ultimate task for a true public-private partnership. I do want to make one comment briefly about the opportunities that we have on the architectural side that might not appear obvious. Because if we're talking about true sustainability and resiliency, we should look at our existing building stock. Because the greenest building is the one that already exists, if you will. So we should collectively evaluate changes for many buildings. Office, a lot of empty office space. Office can be turned into affordable housing. Office can be turned into a boutique hotel, depending on where it is. A department store can turn into a vibrant small business center. It's putting minds together and listening to each other that, from my perspective, is the secret sauce. Thanks, Amanda.
Beautiful, thank you. I love it that we're more powerful together and listening to each other can make such a difference. And another practical project too. Dwayne.
Well, like Kalani, Kamanao, and Bettina, I think collaboration, well, there's so many people with great ideas, but it's we can't do it by ourselves, and it's really about collaboration. But there's something else to Kalani, to the secret sauce. It's about being all in, and it's putting your life behind what you believe in. And since my talk was about Kahauiki village, I can give you an example of what it took for me personally. Anyway, I don't know where 2017 went for me, because I put my life behind that project in conceiving and in working with people every day. What it seems like was for 24/7, but it was a scary and lonely time for me. And I talk about this with leaders here and abroad, that there are a lot of things that you do that you can't, and the fears that you have that you can't share with other people. But it was scary. But for me, I was willing to die for Kahauiki village. And looking back, yes, there were so many obstacles to overcome. But I was willing to die for the project, not for anything else, but for the reputation of all of the people who put themselves and their money behind the project. So commitment and collaboration. I'd like to leave that for people who are listening in and watching. Thank you.
That's beautiful, and it's such an incredible manifestation of a value here in Hawaii, which you manifest. So I'm sorry, I'm emotional, but thank you, Dwayne, for everything you put into that model, and just know what incredible inspiration that you've provided in showing what a successful model that can actually be. So a huge mahalo nui loa from me, having been a little tiny cog in your very, very big project. It's so exciting to see it manifested. And thank you also for the work that you do with AIO and Hawaii Business Magazine, and really helping to uplift all of the public-private partnerships that are going on and to educate the community. So Lauren and Leila, you are our last two.
Okay, I'll keep mine really short this time. But I think I agree completely with the relationship model. It's not just about us and our community, but it's also about us and the natural world, and recognizing that relationship. And I think until we really understand that nature just isn't up in the ocean, that we are actually all a part of it, and all our decisions are impacting each other and the world that is keeping us alive, I think is a really important piece. So again, that we're not on top of nature, but we're actually a part of it is I think the biggest challenge that we need to wrap our brains back around moving forward if we really want to truly live sustainably with each other and on this planet.
People and planet that Kalani referred to. Leila, you are the lucky last.
Yes. So I just wanted to lift up what Dwayne and Kalani, Laura and Bettina said. But to me, it's commitment, collaboration, and I'd like to add courage, especially as our policymakers and our commissioners have to make really tough decisions. And in the Climate Change Commission, they're putting out publications that are a bit contentious sometimes and controversial, and yet they still release them and they still talk about them. And I think it's going to take courage from all of us to have these difficult conversations and make these decisions together. Mahalo nui loa, everyone.
What a beautiful note on which to end this incredible panel, the diversity dividend, people and planet, commitment, collaboration, and courage. And I would like to pay tribute to you in the native language of Aotearoa, New Zealand, as leaders. E ngā mana, e ngā reo, e ngā rangatiratanga. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Mahalo nui loa, and thank you all so much for an incredible panel. Please stay with us as we are going to transition over. You may need to click back into the session, and Celeste Connors is going to come on with Hawaii Green Growth, and then we hope that we can engage you all again in a conversation before we hear remarks from Governor Ige and Senator Brian Schatz.